Previously, on And You Thought It Was Safe. Well, that's one big-budget female superhero movie from the late 20-teens. Suppose I might as well tackle the other ones. I mean, it's either that, or I suppose I could review the RoboCop remake. Get that out of the way. But that would be depressing. No. Do not drop that intro. Oh, goddammit. Son of a... Alright, fine. Let's get this out of the way. It'll be our Valentine's Day counter-programming. As it was when it came out in 2014. Sacrificed to the Lego Movie, and... about last night? Huh. I mean, okay, I can totally see it. In the 20 years since RoboCop 3's failure, Officer Alex Murphy, Detroit Police Department, lived on through 2 different TV series, a small shelf's worth of comic books, and an even smaller shelf's worth of video games. Taken together, they comprise at least 5, and maybe as many as 10 alternate RoboCop dimensions. Not bad for a character who's younger than I am. A remake was inevitable, and for years it hung over us like a cloud, threatening us all with just as inevitable disappointment. Darren Aronofsky was supposed to get the big chair, but he went and made 3 other movies in the time between his name first coming up and this movie's actual release. It was supposed to come out in 2010, the year MGM, which bought up most of Orion Pictures' catalog back in the day, itself filed for bankruptcy, in one of those ways that history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. MGM only escaped bankruptcy through deals with its creditors that are frankly too boring to go into right here, but result in this being a Sony picture. Every A-list leading man in mid to late 2000s Hollywood got his name thrown around to play RoboCop at some point. And they all either passed, or were passed over, in favor of Swedish cop/crime drama vet Joel Kinnaman. This being right after David Fincher's Girl with the Dragon Tattoo remake came out, and temporarily made my fellow Americans care about Swedish actors whose names aren't Skarsgård. And hey, whatever gooses the European box office, am I right? Brazilian director Jose Padilha eventually wound up in the big chair, having by then made 2 movies about cops and the corruption thereof in his home country, Elite Squad 1 and 2. Movies that I haven't seen because I'll be goddamned if I go down the dark and dank rabbit hole that is the history of policing in Brazil. Like, going down the rabbit hole that is the history of policing in my own country is more than enough to keep me up at night. Thank you very much. I'll let somebody who can read Portuguese take care of that for y'all. Because, damn. As fucked up as we are, at least we've never had a military dictatorship. You know. And though he put a brave face on it in public, going so far as to say he specifically asked for this job after spying an old poster on some executive's wall, Padilha was, allegedly, miserable in private, telling friend and fellow director Fernando Meirelles, quote, and this is a second-hand quote, but nevertheless, quote, for every 10 ideas he has, 9 are cut, unquote. And I'll buy that for $1. Hollywood has a long history, which continues to this day, of snatching up foreign directors who've had a hit or two in their home markets, giving them moribund projects, and then micromanaging them into misery. But hey, Elite Squad 1 and 2 made a ton of money, and whatever gooses the Brazilian box office, am I right? Yeah, I'm cynical, but RoboCop 2014 is enough to make even the most sincere normie critic in the universe as cynical as I am. And that's because it bears all the scars of a post-Batman Begins superhero origin story and a remake of a beloved 1980s cult classic film made to cash in on the 20-year nostalgia rule. Paul Verhoeven's initial Hollywood successes fell under that rule in 2007 and 10, respectively. So we got a completely forgettable Total Recall remake in 2011, and this, finally, in 2014. Guess we should be glad nobody's tried to remake Basic Instinct. Yet. I mean, I didn't put this bookshelf here specifically so I could do this when I need to, but let me tell you, it's damn convenient. I also suspect Sony was looking for another superhero franchise to keep in their back pocket. This being right after the second Ghost Rider movie, Spirit of Vengeance, failed to make all the money in the world. And right after everyone laughed at Sony's hubristic announcement of what they've by now trained all of us to call the Spider-Verse. Within a year, the Ghost Rider's live-action film rights would revert back to his parent company. Studio heads Kevin Feige and Amy Pascal would begin hammering out Peter Parker's shared custody agreement. And this RoboCop remake would be driving everyone to drink. It drives me to drink still today. Because despite starting off posturing like an all-new, all-different RoboCop, it seems to get scared about halfway through and become exactly the kind of boring paint-by-numbers remake we all feared it would be in the first place. Only dumber, and with less interesting characters, and an easier resolution. As a result, it's a goddamn slog. The longest theatrical RoboCop movie to date. And it fucking feels like it. There are 3 credited writers, including our OGs, Neumeier and Miner. But given the final product, the development hell it languished in, and the amount of time it languished down there, I can't help but speculate about the team of hands this thing must have passed through on its way to the screen. Was it enough to field a whole baseball team? Or just a basketball team's starting lineup? I don't know. But given how schizophrenic the final result is, I don't actually think I want to know. The only new writer who did enough work to get credit is Joshua Zedemer, who apparently didn't do enough work to get credit on Quantum of Solace, but did do enough to get this job. Given Zedemer's history of uncredits, Padilla's comments to his friends, and what I know about the general atmosphere of Sony Pictures in the last days of the not-so-amazing Spider-Man era, I see this RoboCop remake as yet another victim of corporate movie-making micromanagement. It really wants to be a poignant character study about a man fighting against the machine he's put into after he eats a car bomb. But said man must be a completely uncomplicated paragon of American masculinity. The one good cop, patriarch of a post-nuclear family that still talks to him the way cops' families totally do. That way, their 11th hour abduction by the unambiguous bad guy will prompt suspense. Theoretically. It wants to be a hard-hitting action movie full of jaw-dropping, genre-redefining set pieces. That also has to be PG-13, so theaters don't have to card anybody. Oh god, I just had a horrible thought. This was probably someone's high school Valentine's Day date. Hope that relationship ended right there, 'cause... No. It wants to be a biting social satire of contemporary American life in the 2010s, dressed up in a not-too-distant dystopian future that was itself created in the dystopian present of the 2000s and the 2010s by people who obviously had no idea that they were already living in a dystopia. I mean, my god, our thinking was so blinkered. Our imaginations were so dulled, and we were so goddamn naive that we legitimately thought Glenn fucking Beck was the worst American conservatism had to offer. At least a third of my fellow Americans spent the 2010s pretending our present dystopia wasn't happening. Which is, of course, what allowed Trumpism to swim up behind them and bite them in the ass. Another third, drawn by heat and conflict, actively longed for the dystopia to get even worse. And by now, most of them are either Trump fans or making a killing fleecing Trump fans of their money. The last third was just trying to get by. Living day by day, and every day sinking a little more into myopia and apathy. Honestly, what other choice do they have? Most of my fellow Americans, they have no dreams that haven't been dashed, no great love affairs to cherish or remember, and no power to speak of, most importantly, whether it be political or just good old-fashioned existential power, you know? The power to even exist in this world. Because, of course, in order to do that, you need money. And in order to do that, you gotta sell your labor, which means you've gotta be alienated from it, which just contributes all the way back into the loop of the myopia and the apathy. And there you go. Oh, but, almost forgot, we have the power to yell at people on the internet. Which is kind of like alcohol-free beer. Such a poor imitation of the real thing that all it really does is remind you of what you've lost. And how in Dante's hell is a body supposed to satirize all that? Especially in a country like mine, where satire has long since been turned into the rhetorical equivalent of squid ink, squirted out by complete fucking assholes who say they love freedom of speech, except when I use it to say something like, your jokes suck and you sound like an asshole, go fuck yourself. Pat Novak, host of the Novak Element, this RoboCop's version of Media Break, is an asshole. But he's played by Samuel L. Jackson, which means that he's way too charismatic to be the kind of asshole that this movie's going for. Or seems to be going for in Pat Novak's scenes. He's trying to do that Bill O'Reilly thing of being an unbearably smug piece of shit who speaks only in tautologies. America is great because America is good, and fuck you for thinking otherwise. You think this A on my head stands for France? And while this film did correctly predict that American conservatism would abandon the endless wars it started in Afghanistan and Iraq in favor of moving on to the next item on the Pentagon's hit list, Iran, it did not predict that said abandonment would coincide with the dropping of all pretenses about America providing safety or security to the brown peoples of the world who just happen to live on top of the world's largest oil reserves. Frankly, I'm glad they're done with that. At least for now. It's like, what? Do you actually believe in all that freedom and democracy bullshit? Next thing you're going to tell me, capitalism is the greatest driver of innovation in human history. I mean, just look at all these alternate RoboCop dimensions. Another problem is, Novak is less a parody of a Fox News host, and more a parody of Stephen Colbert's parody of a Fox News host. A parody squared, if you will. Don't. Actually, just don't. The larger problem is somebody, or an executive committee full of somebodies more likely, saw the original RoboCop and thought that the news broadcasts, that are actually smug propaganda, were the be-all and end-all of that movie's satire. Really, the true satire of RoboCop lies in the fact that the propaganda news show, the cops whose deaths it fetishizes, the robots meant to replace those cops, and the local cop-killing crime boss are all owned, in one way or another, by the same corporation. This is, of course, what I guess I now have to call him Murphy Prime, means when he tells Lewis Prime at the end of their first film, "They'll fix you. They've fixed everything." But that seems to be too bleak of a satire for my fellow Americans to really contemplate. It is easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. So in this movie's version of 2028, which is going to be upon us before we even know it, and oh my god, I am not drunk enough for this, Omnicorp, a subsidiary of OCP, has somehow gotten itself the contract to supply killer robots for every country on Earth and the entire military-industrial complex of the United States. But one law, the Dreyfus Act, championed by one eponymous bow-tied dipshit of a senator and seemingly no one else, prevents Omnicorp from deploying their killer robots onto the streets of America. This was a hard enough pill to swallow in 2014, and it's even harder now. The business of America is business, and the killer robot business has been booming ever since America declared, and eventually forgot about, a global war on terror. From 2006 until the year this movie came out, the Department of Defense sold north of $2 billion, with a B, dollars, worth of military hardware to cop shops all over these United States. Usually just for the cost of shipping and maintenance. Yes, Virginia, the Pentagon has its own sort of reverse Amazon Prime going, but just for cop shops. It's called the 1033 program, after Section 1033 of the Defense Authorization Act of 1997. 2014 was a banner year for the 1033 program, as the U.S. military-industrial complex's boredom and frustration with its forever wars reached the level of our collective consciousness, probably for the first and last time, now that I think about it. Then again, we've been a little teensy bit distracted. Almost $800 million, that is, in internet terms, 4 Star Wars movies worth of armored vehicles, aircraft, riot gear, and good old-fashioned guns got shipped out to your friendly neighborhood pigs in 2014 alone. And if you think all those aircraft had pilot seats in them, then I got some bad news for you, buddy. Keep watching the skies, because they are watching you right back. And you can say, well, I haven't done anything wrong, my life's an open book, until you're blue in the face. But the fact remains, that doesn't actually matter. What matters is, does a cop think they can stitch you up for something? Maybe get a promotion out of it. But certainly get their monthly numbers up. And really, what could be more important than that? Serving the public trust? Protecting the innocent? RoboCop 2014 takes place in a world where the U.S. political class actually cared about any of that, and functioned well enough to affect it way before the film opens. And that right there is a bigger, more out there, science fiction-y concept than all the RoboCops in the multiverse. Senator Dreyfus, played by veteran, oh hey, it's that guy actor, Zach Gurnier, gets on his high horse early on, talking about how machines do not know the value of human life. And I can't help but go, yeah, right, like we actually value human life in this fucking country. Shit. But he's a senator, and that's something senators are supposed to pretend they believe in public. What's even more fantastical is that Omnicorp has completely failed to bribe Senator Dreyfus's colleagues into fucking him over and destroying his signature piece of legislation. They don't want to vote against their constituents, one Omnicorp flack tells CEO Raymond Sellers. And is there a word for an attempt to be cynical that's actually painfully born yesterday levels of naive? I'm going with childish. This movie's view of American politics is fucking childish. And all the adults here are giant children, playing their giant child games. So, in a bid to sway public opinion over to making his company even more money, as if a CEO has ever needed to do that since the end of World War II, Raymond Sellers conceives of RoboCop, a way to skirt the Dreyfus Act by putting a man into the machine. All he needs is an idealistic doctor of cybernetics to string along with some bullshit line about helping people and saving lives or something. Oh look, here's one right now, played by a complete waste of a Gary Oldman. Because hey, whatever gooses the Batman fan box office, am I right? And so, after far too long, we come to Detective. Hey, congrats on the promo. Alex Murphy of the Detroit Police Department, who seems to begin his journey in another movie altogether. Call it Elite Squad 3, Norte Edition. Murphy's movie is mostly about him chasing down a complete nothing of a crime boss named Antoine Vallon. See, it's not that cops are agents of a corrupt and corrupting system that is slowly but surely strangling the life out of human civilization, and indeed the Earth's entire biosphere. Oh no, perish that thought. Heaven fucking fend. It's that there are good cops, and there are corrupt cops. You see. And if the former can just take out the latter, then everything will be, well, not fine. You know, still be on track for a slow-motion corporate-sponsored apocalypse, but don't think about that too hard. Why would we possibly be thinking about that in a RoboCop movie? At least the local crime boss won't be stealing guns out of the evidence locker. Murphy gets a little too close to that deal, and Antoine Vallon gives him a car bomb facial. Murphy awakens from that, facing a kindly doctor of cybernetics named Norton, and discovers that he's become a RoboCop. The only real surprise is that Dr. Norton and his team play Fly Me to the Moon in order to wake Alex up from his surgery coma. And how fucking dare they? Honestly. Like, I could be watching Evangelion right now, and I do not need to be reminded of that while watching this RoboCop remake. Ugh. Granted, it's not all bad. In this dimension, Murphy doesn't technically die, so he retains both his memories and what little personality he displayed prior to eating that car bomb. The early bits of Murphy's recovery and initial adjustment to his new circumstances are both effective and occasionally affecting. He's suitably pathetic in the scene where he finds out he's just a couple of chunks on a coroner's table and immediately asks to die. Or the scene where he zooms the laptop camera all the way in when he calls his wife, so Mrs. Murphy doesn't have to see his new body. But I can't help but think original RoboCop generated just as much pathos for its Murphy by having him walk through his old house. No 10-minute training montage, no tearful phone calls with the wife, no lingering tracking shots of his no doubt daily hemodialysis. By this point, I'd given up on this being a holistic satire about humanity's struggle to assert itself through the machinery of late-stage capitalism. And I figured, what the hell. It's going to be a character study about a man who gets turned into a machine that still thinks he's a man, when really, he is a corporate product. And that, at least, could have been interesting. But then we reach the point I mentioned above, where the movie gets, justifiably, scared that it might have missed the entire point of RoboCop, and decides that the only way to fix this is to squeeze a beat-for-beat remake into its last hour. I don't know if there's a good time to try and upload an entire police department's database into one person's brain, but right before an on-camera press conference with the mayor and the top brass is probably the literal worst. The freakout this inspires in Murphy makes kindly Dr. Norton fuck with his brain chemistry until he's exactly as cold and emotionless as his predecessor. So we have to ask ourselves, what was the point of the entire hour that precedes this? What's the point of uploading a whole departmental database into one man's brain, augmented or not? We know this RoboCop has Wi-Fi. We see him use it throughout the rest of the film, mostly to access Detroit's not at all creepy blanket of surveillance cameras. What's the point of recreating the drug lab shootout from the first movie? Twice, but in less interesting ways, that show off less of Murphy's personality than he displayed back in '87 when he was just beginning to recover it. Where, I ask you, are the behind-the-back or over-the-shoulder no-look trick shots? Even the RoboCop in Mortal Kombat gets to show off more style than this one. What's the point, in short, of remaking RoboCop at all? Well, the point is, this movie let Murphy keep his family and friends, just so they could look very concerned by his becoming cold, distant, and efficient. And so that, after a little montage of crime stopping, he can be shocked out of his mechanical detachment by a confrontation with Clara, his wife. And here's that healing power of love I mentioned back in the first review of this by now cursed franchise. So central to American filmmaking, it was already a cliché before the Titanic even left dry dock. One of the many, many clichés original RoboCop avoided. Unless you wanted to get real precious about Officer Ann Lewis, Detroit Police Department. About how the one lady character in the film is also the one who nurtures Murphy's humanity out of his titanium shell. And how that's an even older cliché than the whole healing power of love thing. And you know what? That's fair. My whole healing power of friendship really was just an attempt to recuperate that, because we don't make enough attempts to recuperate shit. To be honest, we just let the fucking fascists take everything from us, and we're like, oh, okay, guess I can't enjoy that good thing anymore. Like, the bad people also enjoy it. But at least we can have these conversations about Ann Lewis. Her Rule 63 counterpart, Jack, is barely in this film, and is more of a motivation for Murphy to solve his elite squad plot than a genuine partner in crime stopping. There's no Murphy, it's you moment, because there's no need for one. There's maybe half a scene where they commiserate about how Murphy can't go home again, since there's no way to fit his dialysis machine through the front door of his still way too big for a cop's salary house. But it has none of the impact of, say, the original "It's really good to see you again, Murphy" scene. Because this movie spent all of that on Murphy's homecoming, where he promises to watch all the Red Wings games with his son. But I don't care about Murphy's son, or his wife for that matter. We don't spend enough time with either of them to make me care, and the time we spend with them doesn't reveal much more to their personalities beyond loving wife and dutiful but traumatized son. All of which makes the climax of this film even more anticlimactic than it is already by virtue of being a remake. Even as it begins, finally, in the last 30 minutes, to feel like an actual RoboCop movie. After Murphy solves his police corruption plot, and Congress repeals the Dreyfus Act, on the same night, conveniently, Omnicorp and Raymond Sellers have a bit of an oh shit moment when they realize that they, pretty much by accident, have actually created the future of law enforcement. A machine does what it's told. And as another cutting-edge movie scientist once said, computers are dumb. They only know what you tell them. But a man, a good cop no less, will follow wherever the case leads, even if it leads to his own corrupted superiors. That's the kind of thing that might scare politicians and the corporate shits who own them. Only the conflicted conscience of kindly Dr. Norton allows Alex to escape the corporate extermination squad, so that he can have himself a big old fight with two Ed 209s at once. Ooh. One terminally underused Jackie Earle Haley, and eventually Sellers himself. Since he's played by Gary Oldman, and since his conscience is the product of good old-fashioned English 101 man versus himself conflict, Dr. Norton is probably the closest thing to a three-dimensional character in this film. He spends most of it being a nebbish nerd, easily manipulated by Raymond Sellers' now vintage 2014, but still, Silicon Valley tech capitalist rhetoric, into doing inhuman things to an actually incredibly vulnerable, underneath all the armor patient. But watching Murphy overcome the vagaries of brain chemistry through the power of romantic love makes Dr. Norton believe in something, I guess? The existence of the human soul is brought up by one OCP Flax so she can make fun of it, but maybe at least the goodness of Murphy's soul. Maybe. Sorta. Kinda. I guess. But by then we're an hour and a half in, and I have officially run out of patience with every character in this movie. To the point where I actually agree with the part of Bob Novak's closing monologue that says Dr. Norton should be on trial for crimes against humanity. But then again, so should Raymond Sellers. And the whole of Omnicorp. And the whole of Omnicorp's parent company, OCP. OCP's hardly mentioned until the end, because it's clearly being positioned throughout the movie as the big-ticket villain that this 2010's remake decided to save for the sequel. Because that always works. In the meantime, Michael Keaton's attempt to play an evil Steve Jobs, so just Steve Jobs, but with the serial numbers filed off, is as boring as Patrick Garrow's Antoine Vallon, all of which misses the fundamental point of RoboCop. Still, the problem was never Dick Jones, or Clarence Boddicker, or Bob Morton, or even the old man, so easily replaced eventually. The problem was, and is, the entire system of capitalist society, over and around and inside all of these people, dictating and constraining their actions with directives as pernicious and classified as Murphy's original Fourth. And a RoboCop movie that forgets all of that, or worse, never knew it in the first place, is as nourishing to the intellect as a McDonald's chicken nugget is to the body. I hope I've managed to explain at least one aspect of why that is. Because if I haven't, the next RoboCop movie is going to be even worse. And even better received by those who should know better, but can't look past the superficial. Let me put it to you this way. RoboCop 2014 makes RoboCop 2 look coherent. And if that isn't a crime, then it should be. Thanks for watching, everyone. Like, comment, subscribe, like you do. And if you want to support the show, then consider giving me money on Patreon. Like the fine people whose names I'm about to read to you right now. Mr. Hootie Dean, Detective Steve, The Aftermovie Diner, and Stu G. Next time, Captain Marvel. Either of them. Hell, I don't care.